Hello, everyone. Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Graham Farrar, President of Glass House Group and Chief Cultivation Officer of Glass House Farms. Graham, what's going on, man? Thanks for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having us. Fantastic day here in California, great growing weather, so happy to be here.
Yeah. You mentioned before we started recording that you're in beautiful Santa Barbara, and for those just listening, Graham's in his truck and he's on the farm right now, right? I mean, you're
Yeah,
sight.
so Glass House Farms, based in Santa Barbara County. I'm lucky enough, or good serendipity, that Santa Barbara is actually my hometown. It's a great spot for agriculture, a perfect climate for cannabis. So we're really lucky to have our farms here. We've got a dispensary here as well. We've got a couple other dispensaries around the state, but the Pharmacy Santa Barbara and Glass House are both here in Santa Barbara.
Awesome. Yeah. And I definitely want to talk about Glass House Farms and how y'all are vertically integrated and the great things you're doing in California. But before we dive into that, let's give the audience a sense of who you are, Graham. So from my understanding, you've been involved with cannabis for 25 years. Is that right?
Yeah, so I'm a longtime lover of cannabis. I'm a big believer in the plant. I'm also a believer, as Martin Luther King Jr. Said, that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So that we've been on this path towards getting back to a more healthy relationship with cannabis, ending the drug war, not tearing families apart. I think cannabis is a great healing power for us, and whether it's fun on a Friday night or a tincture to help you sleep through a Tuesday when you're kids came home for a pandemic in March for spring break and never less. I think it adds a lot. And as a business guy, the opportunity to build something that I think makes the world a better place and creates a business which is home for our employees and gives them good stable employment and creates taxes for our economy and hopefully makes us and the people who work here a bunch of money is just an opportunity too good to pass up.
Yeah, we jammed on that when we had our intro call before, when we were setting this up, this episode, and we both shared that same sentiment in that there's so much that this plant can offer us, right? You spoke about all the the medicinal benefits which are apparent with the cannabinoids that we do know of, but even on the industrial hemp side with material goods and biofuels and eco-friendly plastics and things like that. I mean, it's the possibilities are endless. So basically I'm getting at is it's good to be talking with like-minded gentlemen like yourself because it's a fascinating industry.
Yeah, the cannabis plant, I mean, whether you're talking, hemp or the cannabinoids is amazing. I think it's, certainly worth us keeping in mind that the cannabis has been illegal for less than 1% of the time that humans have been using it, right? So cannabis being illegal, stigmatized, Schedule 1, all that stuff, like that is not the natural state of the universe, right? The natural state of the universe is that it's an amazing plant, one of the few plants that makes phytocannabinoids. Our bodies have an endocannabinoid system, right? And that entire system is made and based is homeostasis is its goal, right? Which is a fancy word for balance. Our bodies make endogenous cannabinoids. Cannabis makes phytocannabinoids. Like there is a symbiotic relationship between us and this plant. There's biofuels. There's hempcrete. There's textiles. You can make a shirt with a third the water that you can with cotton. We just finished harvesting 200 acres of hemp down in the Mojave Desert. So we are big believers. Our view of ourselves is we're a cannabinoid product company that owns a supply chain. There's hundreds of cannabinoids. THC is just the most popular, but there's a lot of great stuff out there that this plant makes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely, man. I couldn't agree with you more in what you're saying. So, obviously you're passionate about cannabis. You've been in the industry or involved with cannabis for 25 years. So why don't you tell us when you first got started, were you just like a user or were you an advocate? Did you, I know, and I know that your background's technology. So kind of how did you do the two?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd say I've probably been using cannabis, I guess, longer than I technically should have. But I've always felt that it was a beneficial thing in my life. So, you know, whether that was a closet or a garage or a house, have been, you know, growing and consuming for a long time. My background on the business side, as you mentioned, is technology. I was one of the early guys in a company called software.com, which was a .com company. We made email servers, digital email servers, back when people first started to get ISPs and internet accounts, and you know, people who didn't work at universities figured out that email was an interesting thing. We made the software that was behind that. Then I was one of the early guys at a company called Sonos, which is a wireless home audio system, and was really lucky to help build that. Then I started a company making apps for kids when the iPhone came out. So if there's kind of I think the common theme for me is I've got a lot of experience doing things that people have no experience doing, and that's a good skill set and plays into cannabis, which is almost the definition of a new market, at least from the business side. So playing in a space where the rules aren't written, and you know, the federal illegality is still not fixed. It's something that we're good at. So we really blended the cannabis, agriculture, and technology together as kind of the three legs of our stool, in terms of how we run things at Glasshouse.
That's amazing, man. And you know, I've talked to other guests on the podcast that have also um, shared their excitement for, like how you just said, this is basically an industry that's barely writing itself, or you know, developing itself right now. We're at the forefront, and so people in those professions, whether it be marketing, advertising, accounting, you know, HR, whatever, we're gonna eventually need those people, you know, and it's a matter of time, really, but it's important to for us to remove that stigma, you know, and really just start to educate and inform people as you're doing, and as your company lives by, you know.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see that, right? I think if you think about it's, you know, I always struggle a little bit to say like the cannabis industry is new, right? Because there's a lot of people who we owe a debt of gratitude to, who have helped pave the way of, you know, getting us to where we are, right? That didn't happen by accident. It happened with advocates and people growing up and humbled and people willing to take risks and help, you know, build an industry. But the transition into like the business side, or I don't know, the above board side, is still pretty new. And I think, you know, cannabis as the industry has suffered a little bit. You know, when the filter set is, you know, who's ready to be a federal felon, typically it keeps a lot of people out, right? And so then the next phase was, then the business people showed up, but they had business IQ, but they had no cannabis IQ, and they thought they knew the answer to everything. And these, you know, cannabis jokers or whatever, or we'll show them. And then then we realized that like business IQ without cannabis IQ doesn't work either. And now we're getting to the point where you have people with both, right? With business IQ and cannabis IQ, and it's normalized and the stigmas are going away. And you're starting to get people who are really good in their field, who don't think they already know the answer. They come in and say, I know marketing or accounting or whatever, but I need to learn this thing and I'm excited to learn it. And then when you get those people together with the people who've been doing cannabis for a long time, great things are possible.
Yeah, what you're saying, I'm kind of like living it right now, because my background, similar to yours, is technology, but within the marketing side. So I worked at large companies, Dell, Sabre, AT&T, to name a few. And, you know, I was working within their social media marketing departments. And so, to your point, like I'm seeing the cannabis industry right now start to slowly migrate those professionals over. Like,
Yep.
you know, I'm still kind of like but then there's also that laxated side, you know, the Cheech and Chong side, where it's like, hey man, like we had a meeting at 3, like, where are you? You know, are you still like it? So it's interesting, you know, but you're right that it eventually will become a you know, efficient industry that's booming with all kinds of different sectors and all kinds of professionals within it, you know.
And interesting to see still how far it has to go, right? So like for our dispensaries in particular on Instagram, like we have to be very careful how we phrase things, because if we don't, you know, say something right, then all of a sudden, you know, Instagram takes it down, right? There's no paid media, there's no advertising in cannabis yet. And not only that, but, you know, if you say, hey, 10% off, Instagram, you know, will lose their mind and delete your post. So it's like all the things that are normal in other parts of the business we're still looking for in cannabis, right? I think
Yeah,
it's a,
I
you know,
and and I've experienced that also because you know I have my own cannabis company that I've launched and I've gotten flagged, you know, for certain posts, and and I own my own social media marketing agency, so I know
right.
the game, but it's just that navigating through the guidelines that we're still waiting for from the FDA in terms of sales and marketing, right? Until that happens, we have to navigate through these waters, and it's a really interesting time, man. You know, it's you don't really know why they're pulling it. It's very subjective, unless you're like a Facebook partner where you're paying thousands of dollars a month to you know interact with an employee in the walls and talk with them. You know, other than that, you're guessing and you're
Yeah, it's exactly what I was going to say. Something. It's not even like there's a clear cut. You can do this. You can't do this. It's just like, oh, okay. Well, I thought it was just us posting a lifestyle picture that happened to have, a beverage in it. But I guess that's product. Who knows? It's like sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's not, and you're just, this black box that you're trying to figure out what you can and can't do. It's not. We had a celebratory dinner when we got a bank account. Put it that way, right? Like getting a bank account, it's not even a part of the normal business plan, much less a celebration. Getting cannabis to have all of our entities fully banked, or
that
not even fully banked, right? Bank accounts, and like they'll never mind loans or working credit lines or mortgages or any of that kind of stuff. Just a bank account was a celebration.
That's so, I mean, it's so funny. I mean, obviously, it probably wasn't funny, and there were so many pain points along the way to get there. But it's like, I feel like once, you know, federal legalization takes place or the states just overturn the federal laws because they're just going to ultimately become adult use, we'll be able to look back and be like, that was hilarious, man. Like, you know, just sharing those stories like that. It's just, it's crazy. But it is
Yeah,
moving.
they'll write books and make movies about this at some point. It's a lot of hard work, but always remind myself how lucky we are to be in the position to help build, to do that hard work, right, and build something that didn't exist before. I think that for me, that's one of the most fun things out there is to have a vision and then manifest that into creating something that didn't exist before you got there. So hard work, but lucky to be here.
For sure, man. And that's a good segue. Let's talk about that. So what I find very interesting about your company, Glass House Farms, is that in one of the articles I was reading, you live by the triple bottom line approach, where everything you do operationally, your strategy, it needs to benefit the business, the customers, and the environment, right?
Yep.
So it seems like you guys really live what you preach, and that's baked into your core, right? Your branding. Your so tell me a little bit about that, and then let's jump into you know how y'all are vertically integrated and the different lines of service that you offer.
Yeah, sure. So I think it comes from cannabis has a long history of compassion and helping, right? I mean, that's where a lot of what we do comes from, all the way back to 21 years of medical cannabis in California, compassionate care and stuff like that. I think we also remind ourselves that this industry would not exist without the plant. So everything we do comes from planet Earth, and so taking care of that planet and what we do is, almost incomprehensible to kind of do it otherwise. So, like you said, the triple bottom line for us is good for the planet. So things like, you know, not using pesticides and using beneficial insects instead, and working with Mother Nature instead of against her. Things like using natural sun.
So that's interesting. The well, you're with the pesticide, and you're I guess what it's called is integrated pest management, IP.
Yep.
So talk a little bit about that for the audience that doesn't know, because when I read that, I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, it's actually really cool. So maybe the easiest way to think of it is the high-tech version of ladybugs in your backyard garden. But what we do is we have scouts that go around, people and our employees in our greenhouses, and they look for, it could be a spider mite, or it could be a thrip, or a root aphid, or something like that. And then anytime we see something, we deploy nature basically to fix it, to combat it. So, for example, if you saw a leaf miner on a plant, there's a bug called the diglyphus wasp. It's a technically a predatory wasp. You would think it was a mosquito because it's so small, but its life cycle is it goes to leaf miners, lays its egg inside a leaf miner, egg hatches, has the leaf miner for breakfast, basically its first meal, cuts a little hole in the leaf miner, it's dead, pops out, and then it goes and does it again. So instead of spraying toxic chemicals around, we use diglyphos or Californicus or Persimilis and just take Mother Nature and kind of tilt her in our favor. So, from the triple bottom line connection, right? It's good for the planet because we're not using pesticides. It's good for our employees because we're not applying pesticides. It's good for the business because we know that we're going to pass all the compliance testing. It's I don't know if it's less expensive, but it's at least the same cost to use the bugs instead of chemicals. And then hopefully the consumer recognizes it and says, I want to pick that product, the people who do it like that, rather than the people who do it with chemicals and things like that. So I think it's a win-win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the better option for sure, and it's pretty awesome that you're like activating insects and or bugs to kill off those other pesticides and whatnot. I mean, that's pretty cool. Um,
Yes, biological warfare in there. It's also another benefit I think that's really cool is cannabis certainly has a lot to learn from agriculture, and one of the things we do is try and import good processes from agriculture to make ourselves more effective and more efficient. But I think cannabis can also contribute a lot back to agriculture. It's a high margin crop. It's also one of the most highly regulated crops on the planet. And so things like the pesticide testing, which they don't do on food, or the microbial testing, which they don't really do on food, as we build industries to deal with that, like buying, $30,000 a month worth of bugs, that bug grower gets bigger, and so the costs come down, and then the bugs become accessible to other crops. And so I think we can start a real kind of positive flywheel of change to make the world a better place through the things that cannabis can, R&D, and that can contribute back to agriculture in general.
Yeah, and speaking of that flywheel of change, I mean, what better time to do it than now after going through this pandemic, right? I mean, looks like we're headed into another recession, if not, we're already in one. I mean, so we need to look at alternative options, and cannabis. All signs are looking great there. So.
Yeah, it is. I think cannabis is one of the few bright spots in an otherwise pretty bleak economy. It's worth recognizing some parallels. I think the end of prohibition is one of the big things that helped bring our country out of the Great Depression. So, thinking about it like that and thinking about how an end of prohibition on cannabis could do the same. It's something like 250,000 jobs are in the cannabis industry right now. Those are you can't have anybody on the sideline with a shovel who's not digging right now. Our economy needs it. Tax revenue that it generates is substantial. I think we've probably hired 80 people throughout the pandemic, not laid anyone off, right? Like that's what we need in our society, our industry, and our economy right now. So that plus all the health benefits, we saw a ton of new customers come in. Like I said, they've been sitting at home watching the case count ticker on the news, and they're not coming in for a Friday night joint. They're coming in for a tincture to help ease the anxiety or help them sleep through the night on a Tuesday. And that's a lot of people finding positive benefits to cannabis that they didn't know about before. So all that together, I think, is a great spot to be.
Yeah, I agree. That's well put. I couldn't said it better myself. So Graham, let's talk more specifically about Glass House Farms and how y'all are vertically integrated. So I know that you own your own greenhouses, you cultivate your own flower, you have your own team that does the cultivation, which feeds into your manufacturing and processing facilities. And you did this all debt free, right? I mean, so talk about how you accomplished that and where you're headed next.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, vertical integration, for people who don't know what that means that we own our entire supply chain, right? So our farm, we grow flower with our team at our farm. It gets packaged into our brands and in many cases sold at our retail stores. So we have every single license type that you can have in California, with the exception of a compliance testing lab, which we're not allowed to have because we have the other kinds of license types. So, greenhouse processing, nursery, distro, manufacturing, solventless manufacturing, retail, delivery, all those are part of Glasshouse. And we've kind of always had the view that eventually there'll be segmentation and specialization in the market. I think if you look at other industries, you see that, but the brand heavy asset light model is predicated on a mature supply chain. And cannabis is basically the definition of an immature supply chain. So until there become experts in every category, you really need to, it's hard to have a great brand if you can't guarantee consistency and quality. And the only way you can guarantee consistency and quality is to do it yourself right now. So we built all the pieces together to work as a unit. And I think that's going to continue to be the right choice for at least the next probably 5+ years until things stabilize and the industry builds. We were lucky enough to do it debt free. We don't have any leases or landlords or mortgages or anybody we owe any money to. We've got some patient capital investors, mostly friends and family. A number of us are, the largest investors and shareholders. And we took a conservative approach when not everyone did. And we thought that that was smart because we wanted to build a business. In our view, businesses produce cash; they don't consume it. And so, one of the ways that you can aim to that is to reduce your cogs and your expenses. And one of the ways to do that is to not have debt and leases and land and mortgages that in cannabis are typically 3 times what they would be in other industries. So they get really expensive really quick. So we skipped that and just built it from the ground up.
Right. And from my understanding, in addition to your greenhouse grow operations, which are focused on the THC, you're also moving to the hemp side, right? Where you're doing outdoor grows for CBD. Is that right?
Yeah, so we just finished harvesting 200 acres of hemp. We did it in a joint venture with our partner Cadiz. Cadiz is interesting because, as far as I know, they're the only U.S. listed. They're on the Nasdaq company that's doing anything in the hemp space. Our view, kind of the lens that we look at the world through, is that we're a cannabinoid product company that owns its supply chain. THC is obviously the most popular of the cannabinoids, but the CBD is gaining. But then there's CBC and CBN and CBG and THCV. All those things can be legally derived from hemp. And so between learning and building our chops on large-scale outdoor cannabis cultivation and being able to work with hemp to create products that are legal in all 50 states, thanks to the 2018 Farm Bill, we thought we could leverage our skills in the cannabinoid space from the last half decade of Glasshouse Farms and do it with hemp in a way that we could serve the entire national market. So we're excited about figuring that out. Still kind of early days, and I think hemp is in some ways even less fleshed out than cannabis is, at least in California, which is interesting. So we're excited about the progress we're making there and look forward to what comes next.
Is that operation for hemp in Santa Barbara also?
It's actually in San Bernardino County, so it's a little bit south, but has some real benefits. I mean, it's warm, bright Southern California sun. It's farmed on virgin land, which means it's organically certifiable. It's large scale. It has tons of water under the ground, which is kind of not what you'd expect in the middle of the desert, but there's actually a ton of water down there. So we have all the sun and all the water that we could need to actually go up to like almost 10,000 acres if we wanted to. So we're just working on figuring out the formula, figuring out the model, and as soon as we figure that out, then we can scale it as big as we want.
That's great. And I had one guest on, and I'm blanking on her name, but she made a point that I hadn't thought of before, and that was the importance of having zoning laws when it comes to outdoor hemp growing and cultivation. With that, it would be too close to, like, say, a THC grow operation that's outdoor because of the potential of feminizing and germination and all that type of stuff. So did you think about that when starting your hemp operation?
Yeah, for sure. And one of the upsides to where we're growing is it's literally in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of a donut hole in the middle of a federal preserve, so there's no other agriculture, certainly no cannabis anywhere around. To make sure it's clear for people. So the issue is that cannabis is very sensitive to pollen and seeds. You don't want seeds in cannabis; it hurts the quality. Hemp, they try and avoid it, but it's a lot less of a make or break kind of thing. So if you're using seeds, feminized seeds, they're oftentimes feminized at 99.5%. But if you're planting 10,000 seeds an acre over hundreds of acres, that 0.5% ends up being a decent number of male plants. And so if you had a non-culled, if you had male hemp plants, they can pollinate cannabis and reduce the quality. So it's definitely something you want to keep your eye on. And part of the reason we like our location down there is we're not going to cross contaminate anyone else, and they're not going to cross contaminate us.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, with Glass House Farms, y'all are vertically integrated. You talked about that. You're jumping into the hemp side now with this huge grow op in San Bernardino, as you mentioned. So, do you foresee? And then you have that joint venture, that joint partnership with Cadiz. Is there any point where you see Glass House Farms going public?
Yeah, I think our view is you build a great company and then everything's an option. So if we build a solid foundation with brands that people like and make a product that people want to buy for less than they're willing to pay for it, like that, that's what a business is. And from there, you can take all kinds of different options, right? So whether that's going public, it would certainly be fun to do it on a U.S. market or in Canada, or if it's just creating a business that makes money and has dividends every quarter, all those are good options for us. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how the market evolves. Certainly, depending on what happens with the elections, I think we could see fast progress, maybe even faster than people thought a year ago, on things like the States Act or the MORE Act. Access to the U.S. public markets, I think, would create a flurry of investment and generate a bunch of jobs and revenue and lots of good things for the economy as a whole. So I'm excited to see that progress happen, and I think I'm optimistic that we're well positioned for whatever the future may hold.
Nice. I have one more kind of forward-looking question for Glass House Farms, and that is industrial hemp, right? We touched on that and the several applications for the fiber and the herd and the biomass. And so, do you foresee your company ever moving in that direction when it comes to producing material goods?
Yeah, I think it's probably we're predominantly a consumer packaged good company. I mean, one of the things that I would certainly like to see on hemp that I don't think really exists now is maybe you call it a dual use plant. Like I would love it if we could find. I don't like throwing things away, right? And or even not using them well as the kind of triple bottom line perspective. So if we could find this strain of genetics of hemp that we could grow for cannabinoids, call it CBD or whatever it may be, and then have the rest of the plant be a good fit for fiber or herd or hempcrete or something like that. I think that would be awesome. Right now, they're kind of two different approaches and different varieties. So, I think if the world came where we could grow 10,000 acres of hemp and pull all kinds of fun cannabinoids out of it to make products that help people feel better with plants, and then take the stocks that were left and make animal feed out of it, sequestering carbon and remediating land all at the same time, I think that would be absolutely fantastic. So, if that kind of world comes to pass, then I think you could see us being a player in it. If it's just farming for fiber, that's probably not the thing that we're most focused on.
And when you say that first scenario, is that dependent on like a genetic being developed that is a hybrid type plant like that, or like what?
So typically the difference right now is for fiber, what you want is kind of long, skinny, narrowly packed, oftentimes harvested before it even flowers, because you're looking for these long, stringy, sinewy fibers. For cannabinoids, you're looking for the buds, and that's oftentimes less densely packed, where you're leaving room for the flower, and then you end up with kind of stalks that don't really uh, they're not the ideal fit for fiber production. So, I mean, certainly there are things you can do. I mean, at the very least, you can take what's left and till it back into the ground or raise the organic matter so that the next season's crops are better. But I think predominantly it would be learning, which is something that's, still we have a lot of to do in the space, and then genetic development. I mean, even today, you don't have a homozygous true breeding seed yet really in cannabis. I mean, that's like it's kind of like bank accounts in other industries. Like it's just an assumption that if you plant 1,000 seeds in another crop, that you're going to have 1,000 identical plants. In cannabis, you plant 1,000 seeds and you might have 1,000 different plants. It's the reason people pheno hunt and then clone is because the seeds have so much genetic variation. So as we develop that, as we perfect our techniques, then I think it's a doable thing. So I think we'll get to the point where you can have a hemp plant that produces great buds and lots of cannabinoids up top, and then leaves a nice fiber that you can harvest after the fact for other uses down below.
That's so interesting, and it's I'm sure it's also would be like a huge factor would be the climate, right? So like where you're at, it would work because of how perfect the weather is for outdoor and greenhouse grows, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the climate is with all agriculture. It's climate and water. Climate, water, and operations are basically the fundamentals of any agriculture. So, finding, and also on the genetics front, finding genetics that work in different climates it's still pretty new, right? I mean, in the Mojave Desert, it's called a 7A climate. Sandy loam soil, really high heats, high winds. Very different than Kentucky or something like that, where you've got you know humid, damp, totally different soil, different seasons. So, and again, in most crops, if you were doing corn or something like that, you'd say, "Here's where I'm growing," and they'd say, "Oh, here's the standard variety that everybody in that region uses. Here's the seed. Every single one of these seeds is going to produce an identical plant." And hemp, it's like, oh well, no one's actually tried to do that before, and here's 5 different genetics, and as you plant them, you'll figure out that it's actually 7 different genetics, and one of them's totally different than you thought, and it's like that inability to plan is both the challenge and the opportunity, right? I mean, if it was all sorted out, then it'd be tomato farming, and that's not a place that we'd likely be successful. So the having to figure it out part is part of the challenge, but also part of the opportunity that allows us to do what we do.
Yeah, there's been farmers that have echoed that same sentiment, and it's like trial and error, right? I mean, they kind of you learn as you go, and then you adapt once you kind of figure out what these seedlings are doing, if they're auto flowering, if it's there's all kinds of variables. And speaking of, so for Glass House Farms, I know that y'all utilize programming through advanced climate computers to create like the ideal environment within your greenhouses. So, given your technology background, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm pretty geeky, and quality, consistency, done efficiently is kind of one of the taglines that we use. In this case, efficiency uh, is not cheap. It means that we can deliver a quality product for a better price. And one of the things that we want to do with cannabis is help make it accessible to more people. So by driving cost out of it doesn't mean lowering the quality. It means being able to do more with less. And so one of the ways that we do that is using technology, because we can figure something out instead of in the old days maybe you're hand watering your plants, right? That's a very, especially in California, labor intensive, expensive way to do things. Instead, we figure out the ideal formula. We get a bunch of really smart cannabis and greenhouse experts together. We get agronomists. We do tissue samples. We figure out exactly what the plant needs, and then we can program that into the computer in a way that it does just the right thing every single time. If you think about it, if you give a plant more than it needs, you're wasting and driving up cost because you're not getting anything out of it. If you give a plant less than it needs, then you're missing something because the plant could have done more. So, to use the irrigation example, we figure out the right recipe. We figured out the right recipe by the stage of the plant, and then to even do fun things like have our fertigation computers tied to a light sensor. So if we have a cloudy day, it'll give it a little bit less nutrients and fertilizer and water. If we have a really sunny day, it says, "Oh, I know that the plant can photosynthesize more, so I'm going to give it a little bit more because it can use it," right? So on the cloudy day, you don't waste by giving it more than it can use, and on the sunny day, you don't lose by giving it less than it could have used. And so getting that stuff down is what I mean. Technology that's what it's good for, right? Doing the same thing really efficiently over and over, and that's how we use computers for climate, fertigation, tracking of costs and labor and all kinds of fun stuff.
That's incredible. So is that programming, that software, is that proprietary, or is that something that you're using third party from another vendor?
So the hardware and the programming language. I mean, you might think of it like your Macintosh computer, right? So anybody can buy a Mac, but what you do with it then becomes your own special sauce. So there's software on there that it does not come pre-set up for our greenhouse and for cannabis. So we take the tools that are available, and this is the same software that the biggest greenhouses in the world and other crops use, and this is what all the guys in Holland use, which is does some of the best agriculture in the country, in the world, producing more per square foot than almost any other place anywhere. And then we take it and say, okay, well, here's the climate that cannabis wants, and here's the inputs that we typically get living in Santa Barbara, and here's how we think we can, do things better. So it's like a set of paintbrushes doesn't paint the picture for you, but if you take the two together, then you can make something really beautiful.
And with your technology background, is it based in like website like development, like programming, or I mean, how techy are you?
I'm pretty geeky. I mean, I think I can certainly have conversations with software developers, but if I'm the one actually doing your software development, you've probably got problems. So I've done a little bit of everything over the years, but really, it's the systems thinking that I think I enjoy the most, or that I'm the best at. Right? It's not necessarily being the expert in any one category. It's more figuring out how to build the team and get all the experts to work together and row the same direction to create something awesome.
Yeah. Well, and what was the reaction from your peers in the technology industry when you decided to move to cannabis? Were they did they give you shit about it? Was it uh okay? Like what was their
I think it's a spectrum. Another saying I like is that the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. So I think we kind of know where we're going with cannabis, and that we're changing, our orientation and our perspective with it as a society, back to a way that's much more healthy, in the way that it has been for all but the last 50 or 60 years. But that doesn't necessarily get reflected by everybody, right? So here in California, Prop 64, which is what legalized, adult use. It passed. I think it was like 67% or something like that, which is, it's a political landslide these days, right? Most things are half a percent, it seems like. But you still have to remember, even at 67%, if you got 10 people in the room, that means 3 people voted against it, right? So there still is that lingering stigma. There still is the folks who, I don't necessarily blame them, right? As long as their mind's open and they're trying to get educated. Our society spent a lot of years telling people that cannabis is a Schedule One drug with no known medical benefit and a high potential for abuse. And if you believe that, then until you're proven otherwise, you continue to believe it. So, for the most part, my friends are a pretty progressive bunch. I think here in California, 21 years of medical cannabis has educated a lot of people. That said, when I've got young kids, I've got a 14-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. And when I started kind of doing this, outwardly as a real profession, my kids were young, and my daughter for a while, when people asked what her dad did, she said he's got a boring 9 to 5 job. So now, 5 years later, I think she's certainly okay with it, maybe even proud of it. But that's even we've watched that evolve over the last half decade about how they feel about things. So I think society's moving in the right direction. It's not everybody's all the way there yet.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's why I'm doing this podcast in a way to have people on like you whose level of expertise is so high, just to put it in layman's terms so that people just understand and they're more educated about it, and again to ultimately remove that stigma.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that's it's incumbent on all of us, and I appreciate what you're doing. Certainly, one of the things that I decided is there's something like half the country uses with some regularity cannabis, right? But because of the stigma, you get the whoever the doctors and the CEOs and the lawyers and the judges, they'd all hide it. And so when it seems like the only person who uses cannabis is the guy begging for change in front of 7-Eleven, you tend to associate those things. And the reality is, all the people doing successful things were using it too. They were just pretending they weren't. And so, we decided early on that we were going to be very vocal, and we're good people with kids, and care about our schools and donate to our community, and all the things that typically we were told that cannabis wasn't, right. And so getting out there and showing the world that good people use cannabis and it makes the world a better place, I think is a part of all of our responsibility.
Yep, 100%, and it's a great message to spread. People need to hear more about it. So with that, Graham, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man. You're on the farm, sitting in your truck. I'm just chomping at the bit to get back to work. So I don't want to take too much more of your time. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I mean, thanks a lot for having us. Awesome. Love what you're doing. Love getting that message out there, and I think it's great. So I would say to everybody out there, take your positive experiences with cannabis, share them with the world. Keep on doing the right thing. Keep on helping the environment. Keep on creating those jobs, and I think collectively we make the world a better place. So let's all do our part. And thanks for everyone's help.
Well said. Well, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it again, and I look forward to having you on in the future as the industry continues to evolve.
Likewise, thanks a lot for having us.
Yes, and thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you again next time. Bye.